Welcome to Phoenix and Flame, my podcast about rising from the ashes on the wings of boundaries. I'm Dana Skaggs, a psychotherapist known as the Queen of Boundaries. If you are new to Phoenix and Flame, please subscribe so you will be notified of new episodes. Visit Dana Skaggs, DanaSkaggs.com for a free quiz to discover how boundaries are impacting your life. This podcast is not intended as psychotherapy. If you are in crisis, please call 911 or contact your local crisis hotline. Welcome, friends. Whether you're out on a walk, running errands, or relaxing at home, it's wonderful to connect with you. Joining us today is Craig Mattson. Craig is an organizational researcher and professor at Calvin University in the field of communication. His research over the past few years has centered on the vocational experience of rising professionals, particularly Gen Z and millennial, with an eye to the intensities and pressures of the American workplace for people of every generation. He's also been a radio guy, a teacher, and a neighbor. Craig and his spouse live in Grand Rapids and have 4 young adult children. Craig, welcome to Phoenix and Flame.
Thank you. I'm excited to talk with you, especially because I love your metaphors, the phoenix and the flame.
Oh, we will definitely be talking about that.
I'm interested. I'm curious.
Yes. Well, let's just kind of jump into that quickly because that's one of the reasons why I started my podcast, because as a psychotherapist, I would see so many people in my office that were experiencing really horrible things. And they would say, Dana, I just feel so alone. I feel like I'm the only one going through this. And I would know that was not the case because I have the privilege of hearing people's honesty. I get to hear the behind the curtain story of people's true life journeys. And so I thought, what if I were to start a podcast? And then I had to think about what to name it. And so Phoenix and Flame basically focuses on 3 areas. 1, what is the fire? What is the flame that you went through that you feel like just burnt you down to ash? And we all have those things, and it happens repeatedly because Phoenix, it's a cycle. They burn, they're ash, they're reborn, and it goes over and over, and that's what life is like. Number 2, I like to know, what was it like for you when you were sitting in this pile of ash, when you felt like you had no hope, you've been burnt down to nothing? What was that like for you on that leg of your journey? And then also, thirdly, what was it like? How did you become reborn as a phoenix, stronger, better, faster, like the $6 million man from back in the day?
Nice 70s reference there.
I know. So it's kind of like, when I talk to people, I like to hear those 3 areas of what they experienced. Now, I'm so interested to talk to you, Craig, on so many levels. And I've got so much to say, but I need to stop talking so much so that you can kind of jump in and tell my listeners more about your experience and who you talked to and why you talked to them and what you found out.
After talking to dozens of rising working professionals, I would use a different pair of metaphors, but it'll be fun to talk about the intersection of the figures of the phoenix and the flame. And the metaphor that made the most sense to me in writing my recent book, Digital Overwhelm. In that book, the metaphor would, instead of a flame, would be a wave, an ocean wave. An overwhelming wave that washes over you and picks you up and turns you over and makes you lose your footing. And then the metaphor on the other side of that pairing would be something like a life raft. In writing this book, I was asking rising professionals, how are you coping with all the intensities of early 2020s work and life? We were in COVID-19. We were in racial upheaval. We were in we still are in a time of profound political polarization. So what's your raft? And in the course of hearing their stories, I learned that you can have a raft, but not know how to steer it, not know how to navigate with it. And so I tried to sort of build on their stories by talking about craft, like the craft of navigating these boats in the tsunamis of digital technological development today. So I would say that the wave and the raft were my metaphors in thinking about workplace life today.
I love those so much. I'm a visual person, so I love all kinds of metaphors. And
Yeah, me
when
too.
I think about waves, something that comes to my mind is I have this phrase called like you feel like your ass over elbows in a
Yeah,
riptide.
yeah, yeah,
And that's sort of what it as you were saying that was
yeah,
coming to my mind, just ass over elbows in a riptide of what all was happening. You
yeah.
know, w- your in what has happened with a lot of the remote
Hmm.
working especially and I have a lot of interest in you, Craig, and your and what you have
Hmm.
found out in interviewing all of these wonderful employees because
Hmm.
being the queen of boundaries, that's my big passion is
Hmm.
boundaries. And I've done a keynote, boundaries in the workplace, yes, no, and everything in between. And
Yeah.
so there's a lot of interweaving and really having a heart for when we're out in the workplace and we're trying to navigate that, and especially with, like you point out, the technology
Hmm.
that has been absolutely like a wave that takes over.
Right.
What are some of the stories that you've heard of that
Yeah.
the Gen Z, the millennials, they're struggling, and
Yeah.
they're also, I think, coming up against um uh people assumptions that people make
Hmm.
about different generations. Like
Yep. Yep.
I'm a Gen Xer.
Yep.
People have assumptions about Gen Xers, and
Hmm.
then every generation has its pros and cons. So, what was your
Hmm.
experience with that, and what were the stories, some of them that you've
Hmm.
heard of their struggles with? What is their experience like, and fighting against some of those assumptions that probably are incorrect most of the time?
We're always doing guesswork, right, Dana? I mean, it's so much guesswork, and so often we're wrong. Yeah. I remember hearing a friend of mine say, like, all our models are wrong and some of them are useful. And I think that's hard how I make sense of the data I was receiving from rising professionals. We're all working with models. Most of them are wrong. Some of them kind of work sometimes. But I'm glad you brought up remote work. I think that's sort of the paradigm of digital overwhelm today for people of every generation. Um, and here's why. So, writers and scholars, and pundits and journalists have been talking about our distractedness for many, many years. I remember reading a book that dates back to, I don't know, the early 2000s, called Media Unlimited. And it was about how our digital media are a kind of overwhelming force today. And it's kind of funny to think about what that author was thinking about in the early 2000s in comparison with where we are today. But I just raised that point because people have been talking about technological overwhelm for a long time. But most of us haven't been listening too carefully. Most of us have been just like, yeah, these are tools. We use them. Sometimes they get to be a bit much. But when we sank into COVID, and especially people who were just getting hired to jobs, um, we experienced a level of digital bewilderment and technological confusion. And it radically altered our sense of what the workplace is and what work itself is. One story that comes to mind is a woman professional. I think she was right on the sort of cusp between Gen Z and young millennial. And she told me that she had just been hired at a marketing company. She was working entirely remotely. And she spent the Zoom meetings with her new, managers scanning faces on the screen, trying to get cues, trying to find some signal that could guide her sense of like what mattered, what was prioritized in this company, what their values were. because too few people were, managing her in a way, mentoring her in a way that she needed. And that remote space made it especially confusing and bewildering and sometimes just exhausting. So, um, I think she said that she felt like she would get an email from a coworker and she would think that they were joking because there was something about the tone that struck her as like, oh, they must be being sarcastic right now. And then she would get on the screen and she would look at their faces and say, oh my gosh, they were not joking. And then you have this bewilderment of like, okay, I've got to recalibrate here. So I think we're figuring out remote work. There's, studies showing that the remote teams are beginning to collaborate even better than in-person teams, which is a huge surprise. Humans are very adaptable, which is remarkable. But nonetheless, the remote aspect of our work today does create a lot of overwhelm, maybe sometimes underwhelm too. Just like I feel so detached. People talk about the emptiness they feel when the screen shuts down, and they're like, okay, I am in my dining room at my kitchen table trying to get stuff done. So yeah, maybe underwhelm is what we should be talking about in remote meetings.
Well, as you're talking, several things are coming to my mind, and I'm just kind of jotting them down so I don't forget. And I'm just going to kind of toss them out and just let you take whichever one you want to take, and we'll run in whatever direction we go.
Okay.
First of all, you mentioned that you had 4 young adult children. I have 3, and one of them is in a situation that you're describing, and I'm watching him, on the one hand, enjoying the ease of being at home because they're allowed so many minutes to go to the bathroom, so many minutes to eat lunch, right? It's kind of, they have to have some kind of a management over that. When he's at home, that's much easier versus being on site when you can't hardly get up and get all the way to the bathroom back in time. Yeah. So he's enjoying that, but at the same time, there is that isolation. There's and that leads me to my next comment for you is the facial cues that you're mentioning because I remember one time, it's kind of a little funny story, being a guest on a podcast, and it was someone who was in a very different time zone. She was in Europe, and it was late in the day for her, and she didn't want to be on camera, right? Yeah. So she just put a picture of herself on the screen. So we did this hour-long podcast where I was the guest, and all I could see was a picture of her. And so I sat here staring at my surroundings in the room that I was in, trying to listen very intently at her voice. Yeah. Because I didn't have her face. I couldn't see her face to figure out, like you said, with the girls, were they sarcastic? Were they serious? Yeah. We read so much, and I actually went to speech and language therapy. They did some research on communication, and they did a pie chart, and the amount of the communication, the cues that we use, the amount that's actually our words was very small. You had all of the other things like the
right
facial
the
expression,
signaling.
body language, all the signaling. So I'm kind of wondering for you, when you were talking to her and listening to all these people that you've had the privilege of interviewing, how do you see with the technology, which does provide us with a lot of efficiency and ease, this is true, but it robs us of a lot of things. And I'm wondering what you think, not only in the workspace, which is very clear, but also in the personal space, in interpersonal. Like, did they talk about it all about what it's like to try to formulate relationships, trying to reach out with, and I know your focus was mainly in the corporate space and work, as is mine tends to be, but also we are one person. As a psychotherapist, I know we're not just a work person. We're a personal and we're a work person together. So what are your thoughts on that detachment and that lack of facial cues and the things with the digital overwhelm and underwhelm.
Yes, it feels like the technological overlay in workplaces today requires a whole new set of manners, but we can't agree on what the manners are. So we're constantly irritated with the people around us because they're not complying with our particular code of like, here's how you should behave digitally on Slack, or don't text me, email me, or don't email me for crying out loud. Please DM me, and this is not how to run a meeting, and so forth. So there's like all these codes and systems of etiquette that we all disagree on, and they're something we have to work out together. So I think in my book, Digital Overwhelm, I try to say, I mean, often without saying it, but just like demonstrating it, that we have to slow down. We have to take a look. We have to become mindful of how our tools are shaping our work experience, and sometimes distorting our work experience. I'm thinking about cases of harassment that I encountered as a white, middle-aged, middle-class guy. I had a lot of blind spots, right? And in talking with these younger professionals, I was often sort of pulled up by, oh my gosh, that's a reality in the workplace for you. Maybe it is for me too, and I've just not been noticing it. But harassment and unwanted approach was something that people talked about. And sometimes that experience of sexual harassment like flipped to the script for them, and remote work actually became a safer space. They could control the angles. They could, if you're a woman sitting at a workstation and your male manager comes up over your shoulder looking at your screen, there's a kind of proximity that sort of makes sense there. The dude's just trying to look at your screen, but there's also sometimes an unwanted closeness there. And then like the angles you're trying to sort of guard and manage and negotiate, and how much closeness you want. Well, in a remote work situation, like sometimes that's a little easier to manage. Your camera allows you to frame what you want to show and the kind of closeness you want to keep. So everything you said is right. Like we do lose a lot of cues through remote work. I find you have to, put a lot more energy into the cues that you're providing and that you're looking for. It's very possible to manage well in a remote situation. It's very possible to negotiate collaboration well in a remote work situation. But my gosh, does it take a lot of energy. It takes more energy than you'd think. So I think what you're saying is right. There is a loss of verbal and nonverbal cues, especially nonverbal cues. But then there are also these possibilities for maybe maintaining a little bit of appropriate distance too, and not feeling like you're constantly having to do this whole person theatrical performance like sometimes corporate spaces require us to do. So that's my sort of both and answer to your question.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Craig, I appreciate your feedback on that. And as you're talking, and I've got more questions. So one let me give you the two questions and then answer them in your comfort, whichever way you would like. One of them is, in your experience from interviewing these individuals, do you feel like that certain personalities adjusted better because they roll with technology issues? Like we were talking, and listeners, you don't know this, but Craig and I were laughing and chatting before I started to record today, because I was sharing some of the technological issues and struggles that I was having recently. And anybody that does podcasting for any length of time, you're going to run into, it's not a if, it's a when. You're going to run into technology problems and trying to get them fixed and trying to get access to that. And I have to be brutally honest and say, I do not have the personality I have to calm myself down. I'm more of the entrepreneur, visionary, the people. I want to be out there. that's what I love. I don't like all of the technology stuff. And so
Yeah.
I was wondering, Craig, number
Mhm.
one, if you ran into people whose personality styles
Mhm.
were some floated better with the
Yeah.
technology overwhelm and some kind of got sucked into the flotsam and jetsam of it all, which I would put myself probably in
Yeah.
that category.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm gonna take a little side note and say I have a tech person who I've asked myself, her name is Sadie, and I said, what would Sadie do right now? because because she's so
Yeah.
calm and she
Right.
doesn't get
Oh,
upset and she just like
yes.
rolls with the flow. When I'm wanting to
Yeah.
scrape my face off with my fingernails,
Uh,
she would just be like, "Oh, la ti da," and I'm thinking, "Okay, Dana, calm down, breathe. What
mhm.
would Sadie do right now? And be Sadie right now." And so I had to like channel my tech person. And that's my question number one, personality style and dealing with
Yeah.
digital overwhelm. And number two, do you
Yeah.
feel like that people, because you referenced the woman who, when she was at work, and felt like her boss was behind her. And of course,
Mhm.
certain people that have gone through different traumas, they will have a different response
Right.
to those type
Yeah.
of
Oh my
situations.
gosh. Yes.
And so I was also wondering if you ran into people, if you interviewed them, that their home situation,
Mhm.
because maybe they live with a lot of
Yeah.
people, maybe they live in a
Yep.
very loud space, that
Mhm.
they were frustrated trying to create a work environment at home, maybe with a
Mhm.
lot of people running around, dogs barking,
Yeah.
chaos, and they have
Yeah.
much trouble, creating a place where they can focus. So those are my two questions: personality
Yeah.
style with digital overwhelm,
And
and
home life.
then the home life. Yeah.
The home economics. Yeah, that's great. I love it. Oh, Dana. Yeah, personality type definitely played a role. It certainly surfaced. How could it not surface? You're talking to humans, all these kinds of temperaments and dispositions and personalities. One of the chapters in my book, Digital Overwhelm. Here, I was just looking at the table of contents, see if I could figure out which chapter it is. It's a chapter 5 in this book, and it's called Fixing Things, because it's a whole chapter about technological breakdown and how people respond to that and how do they cope with it. I don't know, like you, I find that to be one of the most persistently emotionally troubling aspects of work life today. It's just things break down. That's what tools seem to do. So yeah, I asked them, like, what's your attitude towards the tool when it does break down? And I'll never forget, one guy said, I get hostile. I get aggressive. And, he was kind of disappointed in himself, and he didn't like that necessarily about himself, but he's like, that's my response. Another person was a bit more like, is it Sadie? Your
Yes.
tech
Yes.
person.
She's fantastic.
Yeah. So I think you have to move in a Sadie direction, if you're going to survive technologized workspaces today. But yeah, this person was like, oh, it's an opportunity for taking a deep breath, slowing down, you know, kind of re-looking at the workplace, not just looking through it. And yeah, so I do think disposition, temperament does definitely shape this. And that when our tech breaks down, it teaches us not only about the tech. That's great. We often learn about things because they break down, but we also learn quite a lot about ourselves and our coworkers, which isn't always great. Like, oh, I seem to have this weakness in my temperament that I didn't want to foreground that. But anyway, your second question was about home life. And I remember this woman I interviewed in a podcast studio in Chicago, downtown Chicago. And she brought her kids with her. That was a first for me. I'd never had kids in a studio. They were young kids. And so it was a hopping interview. I mean, it was pretty dramatic in some ways because there were all these interruptions we had to edit out later. But I noticed that she was just somehow she was able to be quite vibrant and, energetic and focused, but she was also very loose. Like, she sat loose to the conversation. She had to distribute her attention to her kids now and then. And she told me that at home, when she's working with clients, she sets up this kind of staging area, uh, and it's sometimes hilarious the ways that just outside that staging area. You know, she has this background and she has this standing desk or whatever, and the laptop and the whole, all the paraphernalia we all use.
Yep.
But she described like her kids might be pulling at her kneecaps, you know, while she's trying to talk to this client in Indonesia who has no concept of what her home life is like. So yeah, your question is astute. Our environments really do profoundly shape our capacities for digital communication.
Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. That is the truth. And as you're talking, I'm thinking of a quote that I ran across years and years ago from Charles Darwin. And I'll see if I can get this right. It
All
says,
right.
"It is not the strongest that will survive, nor the most intelligent. It will be those most responsive to change."
Right.
And that's what I hear you
Right.
talking about, because the digital era and COVID, and it just made it even more pronounced. And now you have these generations, you know, you have Gen X that we remember before internet.
That's right.
Which you might as well say that you lived in a cave, right?
What did we do?
No, I mean, I would say I'm embarrassed, but I don't really get embarrassed by much. So I remember, you know, the phone on the wall that had the
The long
cord
cord.
and
Yeah.
the curly cord and everything. So you have us who are dealing with technology. Then you have the millennials and the Gen Z that they were born into it. They've never known anything else. And so you have all these different types of generations that are coming into I imagine perceiving and responding to technology in a very different way. What did you glean? What insights did you glean from all those wonderful interviews that you were able to do
Oh man.
about on that level?
Yeah. Yeah, I know you and I have a sort of, there was a Denzel Washington movie years ago in which it's kind of like a sci-fi thing, and he could wear this like headset that would allow him to be looking with his natural eye at the world around him, and then he's also looking through a lens at the past. And so he's like seeing the same situation, you know, in the present and in the past.
Wow.
And it's how we feel in the workplace. We're like, we have lived in we've lived and worked in workplaces where the digital did not saturate us quite so much as it does today, not nearly. And so, yeah, we have this weird sort of, I don't know, bifocal experience of, sometimes literally bifocal, right, Dana? But yeah,
Progressive
so
lenses, Craig.
that's right. We try to hide this, keep it on the down low. Yeah, this sort of split screen reality. So. Yeah, I think the thing that struck me about especially the younger workers is that that sense of like, this is just what we're given, this is just what we have, and sort of as I've continued to pay attention to Gen Z and millennial experience of workplaces, I think there's a little less alarm among them about artificial intelligence, large language networks, and the sort of pervasive technologizing of the workplace. They're just not really afraid about that in ways that I sometimes freak out of like, oh my gosh, this is too much change too fast. Yeah, they're not really there. But on the other hand, our sort of split screen reality, like a gift you bring to the world, Dana, is that you did live before it was like it was today, like it is today. And you have some values and some commitments that are shaped by that sort of pre-smartphone life that you led. I sometimes think about my work in the 90s and wonder, what did I do on lunch break? I just ate my sandwich and stared at the wall. I don't know.
There was no scrolling through the phone, you know?
No, I think I actually read books during my lunch break. That's really weird. So,
You're so funny, Craig.
yeah. So I packed a sandwich and a book. What else?
So let me
What else
ask
can
you
you do?
this. In the question that I'm kind of interested in your answer, because I run into this with people, particularly, and I respect it. I see both sides. One part of my personality and part of what I do for a living is I'm able to see many different facets, many different aspects, many different points of view. So it's very hard for me to land hard on
Yeah.
a point of view because I can see so many different
Hmm.
angles.
Right.
So the question is, if my job doesn't feel meaningful,
Hmm.
should I quit?
Right.
And I can see several different angles from that,
Yeah.
several different points
Hmm.
of view. And some of those are generational, some of them are personality. What are
Hmm.
your thoughts on that? Because I know I have some listeners right now that are struggling with that. They may be at a job that they feel like, is this it? Is this, it doesn't feel like I'm contributing to life. I don't,
Yeah.
should I just keep going because I have bills to pay, or do I need to step back and rethink things? What are your thoughts, and what did you run into when you
Hmm.
interviewed these individuals, and what insights did you glean on that question? If my job doesn't feel meaningful,
Yeah.
should I quit?
Yes. Yeah. I did run into several postures towards work in our early 2020s and all the intensities and pressures of that time. Many of them digitally mediated pressures, whether social media or just the tools that we're using. It's an intense time. So if your job feels meaningless, or it just feels kind of empty, that's a weird experience, right? You have like this kind
Hmm.
of intense experience of our historical moment, and then you get to work, and it's like, ugh, what's happening? Yeah, I ran into that, Dana, definitely. Four postures I kind of pulled from their stories. There were people who dealt with that sense of like, does my job mean anything? By trying to use their work to make the world better. It sounds a little naive, but I didn't think that they were naive. When I talked to them, they seemed like very practical and strategic minded people. One was like a deputy campaign manager for a Chicago, Illinois politician. Someone else worked for a metropolitan water district. So these are people who have to be really practical, but they saw their jobs in terms of the why of their work. And they might have to come up with that why on their own, but they infuse their work with a sense of like, I'm making the world better. So even on days when it feels pointless, that's what I'm about. Another posture towards work that I encountered was therapeutic. So sort of like your line of work, Dana. So these people saw their work. Maybe it's kind of pointless. Maybe it's not going to make history, but I'm here to try to help shape the lives of my team members. I want to pastor them or mentor them, or help to cultivate their sort of professional ethos. And then I also ran into people I called the thespians, and these were people who saw their work in basically kind of performative terms. They saw work as a sort of theatrical space.
Hmm.
Um, they might be masking because of their orientation, or because they just really don't care about their work, but they need to pretend like they do. They might also be like improv artists. So they just saw their work as like, this is finally about trying to coordinate with other people, like you do when you're doing an improv show. You just adapt and adjust and flex and dance with the people around you. And that's the point. That's what we're trying to do.
Hmm.
We're just trying to pay our mortgage together. And then the last group was the deconverts, the skeptics, the people who said, yeah, my job's pointless. It doesn't mean anything. And I don't really care about that because I get my meaning elsewhere. I find my work after hours. And those postures, as I coded the stories and the data that I heard through all these interviews, yeah, they were roughly equal. Like there were roughly equal parts of each of
Hmm.
those. I would have thought there would be more skeptics than, uh, you know, inspirational world betterment people, but it wasn't the case. Like there seemed to be equal parts of each of those. So your question was a kind of binary question, which wasn't kind of you, Dana, to give me a binary, a yes or no. Should you quit your job? I'm like you. I have to say, well, it's possible that you can find a posture towards your work that's sustainable, even if your job does feel kind of empty. Um, and I think it's hard to be a human and not have your job feel empty at many points. I'm sort of, I don't know, it's not quite every other day, but it's pretty common for me to have that experience of like, oh my gosh, I am a pretty small factor in the universe. And my job is just not that important. So, I think there can be some freedom and humor in that. I'm glad you're laughing because I think that that's a right response to it. Um, it- there are some jobs where the meaninglessness comes from people mistreating you and abusing or harassing. And in those situations, of course, like the pointlessness of the work is coming from people's cruelty, and you should just get out. You should just leave. Um, Sometimes your sense of the meaninglessness of work is a prompt to reflection, and you're like, yeah, I mean, maybe the reality is talking to me right now, and I should move on. So I don't have a binary answer to your question, but I do think it's possible that you can develop a posture. It's possible that you need to take this prompt from the universe and say, yeah, what should I be doing right now? Maybe not this job.
I like it. I like it, Craig. Yeah, I purposefully ask questions like that because life is complicated. Life can be multiple shades of gray. Life is frequently complicated. And for someone to act like it's not, they're either delusional, stupid, or I don't know, brain, I don't know what, because life is complicated. And so I want to leave you with this. Unfortunately, our time is up for today. I feel like we could probably talk a lot more. But I remember telling somebody one time that I felt like a cup of water in an ocean. And I got to thinking about that sensation for me. And what I came to, the conclusion I came to is this: I may be a cup of water in an ocean, but to someone who is dying of thirst, a cup
Mhm,
of water is pretty darn meaningful.
mhm,
A cup of water could be the difference between life or death.
mhm.
So even though you might feel like a cup of water in an ocean, your cup matters.
Thank you. That's good.
You
That's
know what
really
I'm
good.
saying?
I
Craig,
do.
I
I hear
thank you
you.
so much. Gosh,
Well,
any last words of wisdom, anything you want to share before we wrap up today for my listeners?
yeah, I mean, I think I really want to invite people to take a look at my book, Digital Overwhelm. And my reason for doing so is self-interested. I'd love to sell some books. That's a joy for an author. But I think it's also the case that I like to learn from people. I think of myself as a sort of public learner. And so as you do take a look at the book, um, reach back out to me, connect with me, let me know your experience. I've learned from you, Dana, today. The cup of water metaphor is so good. And your emphasis on sometimes you're sitting in ashes and it looks like that's where you're going to be forever. The possibilities of a phoenix life is just a wonderful figure. So, yeah, I think that's my posture as I love to learn from people. That's why I interviewed all these rising professionals. Um, and I would love to learn from your listeners too.
Fabulous. Craig, thank you so much for spending your valuable time and your wisdom and your insights with me and with my listeners. Thank you very much.
As a joy, as a joy, as a gift to me.
Now, guys, I know that you have heard multiple things today from Craig that you're thinking, I have a best friend, I have a coworker, I have a relative that needs to hear what Craig Mattson has to say, needs to read his book. Oh my goodness. So take this podcast episode, copy and paste the link, send it a text, send it an email, put it on your favorite social media sites so we can grow our Phoenix and Flame community to reach out and let people know you are not alone.
Mm.
I hope your day has been fantastic. I hope the rest of your day goes great. I'm Dana on Phoenix and Flame.